If the universe could, somehow guarantee us just an infinite supply of hot, perfectly baked pizza, the entire science of economics would cease to exist tomorrow.
Oh, it would vanish completely. I mean, there'd be no stock markets, no supply chains, no price tags on anything.
Right. Welcome to today's Deep Dives. And to you listening right now, our mission today is honestly massive. We are decoding the fundamental operating system of human existence.
Because unfortunately, we do not live in a universe of infinite pizza.
Yeah, sadly, we live in a universe of friction. And to understand how we navigate that friction, we're diving into a real fire hose of information today. It's this incredibly dense breakdown of the mechanics that govern, well, literally everything from your morning coffee to the global balance of power.
And it condenses the entirety of economics into roughly 20 minutes of transcript, it's a lot to take in.
It's so dense. But we aren't just going to, drown you in charts and academic jargon.
Yeah.
We're going to filter all of this through 3 core concepts that dictate every single day of your life.
Scarcity, choice, and opportunity cost.
Exactly. Which brings us right back to that thought experiment.
Yeah, because economics isn't fundamentally about money or, men in suits yelling on trading floors.
Like in the movies.
Right. It's actually just the study of how humans behave when they are confronted with limits. You want things. You want a safe place to sleep. You want engaging entertainment.
I definitely want a slightly larger TV than my cousin has.
We all do. But the physical reality of the universe is that there simply isn't enough stuff to go around.
Okay, let's unpack this. So scarcity is essentially the permanent baseline of reality. Like, it's just the bug in the universe's code.
Or maybe it's the main feature, Scarcity is not just a temporary supply chain glitch. And it's definitely not just a synonym for poverty.
Right, it's bigger than that.
Much bigger. It is a permanent, inescapable mathematical reality of physics. I mean, there are only so many raw materials in the Earth's crust. There is only so much arable land to grow food.
It's physical limits.
Exactly. This friction, this agonizing gap between infinite human desire and strictly finite resources, that is what creates the need for every economic system humanity has ever devised.
Okay, let me push back on that universality for a second.
Yeah.
Because we see people who seem completely exempt from this. What if I'm like a billionaire?
Okay, let's say you are.
Right. Let's say I possess $100 billion. I could buy all the pizza I could ever consume. I can buy an entire island. Does scarcity actually still apply to me? Or have I just, bought my way out of the fundamental human condition?
You've definitely insulated yourself from the scarcity of basic necessities, certainly, but you have absolutely not escaped scarcity.
Really? How so?
Because even with theoretically infinite wealth, you do not possess infinite time, you do not possess infinite attention, you literally cannot be in 2 places at once.
Right, physics still applies.
Yeah. If you, the billionaire, choose to spend your evening attending a fancy charity gala in New York, you cannot simultaneously be relaxing on your yacht in the Mediterranean.
Oh, wow.
You have scarce resources, even if that resource is strictly limited to the hours remaining in your lifespan.
Because I only get 24 hours in a day, regardless of my net worth.
Precisely. The infinite pizza reality does not exist for anyone. And because it doesn't exist, we must make choices.
Right.
Every moment of your life is an allocation of a scarce resource. Economics is simply the framework for understanding how we make those choices when we can't have it all.
Which means every time I make a choice, there's this hidden mechanism operating in the background. Like, if scarcity forces me to choose the gala over the yacht, how do we actually measure the weight of that choice?
That's the perfect question.
Because it's not just about what I gained, right? It's about what I lost.
It is entirely about what you lost. And that hidden weight is what economists call opportunity cost. It is honestly one of the most profound lenses through which you can view human behavior.
The hidden price tag of everything. I love this concept because once you understand it, you can never look at your daily decisions the same way again.
You really can't.
Opportunity cost means that every single choice you make carries the active cost of not doing something else. Think about it. To you, listening to this deep dive right now, you are actively paying a price to be here.
You are.
By choosing to consume this exact information, you are paying the cost of, not watching cat fails on YouTube. You're paying the cost of not taking a nap.
It's a lighthearted example, but the philosophical implication is incredibly heavy. Opportunity cost dictates that absolutely nothing is truly free.
Nothing at all.
Nothing. Even if someone hands you a free ticket to a 3-hour concert, the cost of attending that concert is the value of the very best alternative thing you could have done with those 3 hours.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's ground this in a weekend scenario for everyone listening. Say I decide to spend 2 hours deep cleaning my apartment on a Saturday morning.
A noble choice.
Right. And my brain naturally thinks, well, I just gave up 2 hours of watching TV. But my opportunity cost isn't just leisure, is it? Could my opportunity cost be the $50 I could have made if I picked up a freelance graphic design gig for those exact 2 hours?
The math gets very specific here, actually. The opportunity cost is strictly the value of the highest valued alternative that you had to forfeit.
Highest valued, got it.
Yeah. So if your absolute next best option to cleaning the apartment was indeed making $50 doing freelance work, then the act of scrubbing your floors effectively cost you $50.
Wow, that makes my floor seem very expensive.
It should, but let's flip it. What if your next best option wasn't the $50?
What else would it be?
Well, what if you were dangerously sleep deprived? And getting 2 hours of restorative sleep would have made you vastly more focused and productive for the entire following week.
Oh, I've been there.
Right. In that scenario, the opportunity cost of cleaning your apartment was that massive compounding loss of health and future productivity.
So opportunity cost forces you to rank your desires ruthlessly. You have to evaluate your scarce resource, in this case, time, and decide which option provides the most utility.
Exactly.
And this concept scales up dramatically, doesn't it? Like, it's not just me deciding between mopping and napping.
Oh, it scales all the way up to global superpowers.
Really? How does a government deal with opportunity cost?
Well, when a national government decides to spend $10 billion on a new fleet of military submarines, the opportunity cost is the state-of-the-art hospitals, the modernized power grid, or the tax cuts that $10 billion could have alternatively funded.
That's a massive trade-off.
Every political decision is fundamentally an exercise in opportunity cost.
But here is the friction we run into as individuals.
Yeah.
Because of opportunity cost and because of our painfully scarce time, we literally cannot do everything ourselves.
We can't even come close.
Right. I don't have the time to build my own house, sew my own clothes, grow my own avocados, and manufacture my own TV. If I tried to do all of that, my opportunity cost would be, well, starvation, probably.
Yes, you would not survive.
So how do we acquire the things that we simply do not have the capacity or the time to make ourselves?
The only viable survival strategy for a species trapped by scarcity is trade.
The mechanics of trade.
Yeah.
The baseline premise feels incredibly simple, almost like a playground interaction. I have 10 apples, you have 5 bananas.
A classic scenario.
Right. If we both just eat what we have, we get terribly bored. So we trade some apples for some bananas to get variety. It's a win-win scenario. Unless, of course, you're secretly allergic to bananas.
Then it's a very bad trade.
Well, it's still a win-win. It just ends with an emergency room visit and an EpiPen.
Fair point. But the barter of apples for bananas is intuitive. The true engine of human progress, though the concept that actually built modern interconnected economies is an idea called comparative advantage.
Comparative advantage.
Yes, and it is brilliantly counterintuitive.
I need you to break this down mechanically, because this is where traditional logic tends to fail people.
Yeah.
We usually assume that the person who is the absolute best at making something should be the one to make it.
Right. That is what we call an absolute advantage. If you can chop 10 logs in an hour and I can only chop 2, you have the absolute advantage in lumberjacking.
Makes sense.
But comparative advantage suggests that you don't actually have to be the objective best at something to be highly economically useful.
Wait, really?
Yeah. You merely have to be the least worst, proportionally.
Okay, let's use an international example from the source material to map this out. Imagine Brazil and Canada.
Good example.
They both want to consume coffee and corn.
Yeah.
Let's say Brazil's climate is incredible for coffee. But to produce 2 tons of coffee, Brazil has to shift resources away from agriculture, giving up the ability to grow 1 ton of corn.
Okay, so Brazil's opportunity cost for 2 tons of coffee is 1 ton of corn.
Exactly. Now look at Canada. Let's say Canada is a highly efficient, high-tech agricultural powerhouse, but their climate is terrible for coffee.
Right, it's freezing.
So for Canada to force 2 tons of coffee to grow in specialized greenhouses, they have to divert massive resources, sacrificing the ability to grow 2 whole tons of corn.
And there is the revelation. Even if Canada is objectively better at operating advanced farm machinery, even if they possess an absolute advantage in total volume, Brazil still has the comparative advantage in coffee.
Because their sacrifice is smaller.
Exactly. Brazil only gives up 1 ton of corn, while Canada gives up 2. Brazil has a lower opportunity cost.
So the mathematically optimal move for the planet is for Brazil to abandon corn entirely, put all their energy into coffee, and let Canada put all their energy into corn. Then they trade.
When they specialize based on their lowest opportunity cost, the total amount of both goods existing in the world actually increases. It's almost like magic.
I want to pull this down from international agriculture to everyday life, because this sounds suspiciously like navigating household chores.
It absolutely applies to chores.
Say I live with a roommate. I am objectively terrible at everything. I am a remarkably slow cook, and when I wash the dishes, they are somehow dirtier than when I started.
A tough situation.
It is. My roommate, however, is a culinary genius and a speed cleaner. They possess an absolute advantage in both tasks.
Yeah.
Does economic theory dictate that my roommate should just do all the chores while I sit on the couch?
Only if your roommate enjoys exhaustion. This is the magic of comparative advantage at the micro level. Let's look at your roommate's opportunity cost.
Okay.
If they spend 1 hour cooking, they conjure a masterpiece dinner. If they spend that exact same hour washing dishes, they simply get a stack of clean plates. Therefore, the opportunity cost of your roommate doing the dishes is the loss of a masterpiece meal.
That's a massive cost.
It is. Now look at you. If you spend an hour cooking, you create an inedible disaster.
True.
If you spend an hour washing dishes, you do a mediocre, slow job. But your proportional disadvantage is much smaller when doing the dishes. Your opportunity cost for washing dishes is just the loss of an inedible disaster.
Which is a net positive for everyone.
Exactly. So you specialize in the dishes. By taking the job where you are the least worst, you free up your roommate's incredibly valuable time to focus solely on the high-yield task of cooking.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
The household, as a microeconomy, gets a fantastic meal and mostly clean dishes in far less total time. Comparative advantage dictates that you are, despite your flaws, economically useful.
That is oddly validating.
Yeah.
But when we take that exact roommate logic and expand it across borders, that is globalization, right? Ships, train cars, and cargo planes moving goods around the globe.
It's the exact same mathematical principle.
We trade to increase overall efficiency, to lower prices at the checkout counter, and to gain access to a wider variety of goods.
We do, and it is a marvel of human coordination. But, and we have to be honest here, this transition raises a highly sensitive reality.
Right.
While the math proves that free trade makes the overall global system wealthier and more efficient, the benefits are not distributed equally.
No, they definitely aren't.
When a manufacturing industry relocates to another country because that nation has a clear comparative advantage, local workers lose their livelihoods. Economists refer to this as structural adjustment.
Which is a remarkably sterile term for a deeply painful human experience. If a worker loses their factory job of 20 years because the operation moved overseas, they don't find comfort in the fact that overall global efficiency increased by 2%.
Not at all.
They just know they can no longer pay their mortgage.
It's the inherent friction of the system. Trade is a perpetual, delicate balancing act between maximizing total economic efficiency and managing localized human disruption.
Yeah, that makes sense. But once we recognize why we need to trade, we run into a logistical problem. How do we actually organize these trades? How does Brazil know how much coffee Canada wants and at what price? We need a mechanism.
We need a market. Which brings us to the actual negotiation of scarcity.
When we think of a market, the image that usually comes to mind is a farmer's market tents, organic tomatoes, people exchanging cash. Or maybe the floor of Wall Street, with traders executing millions of high-frequency digital transactions a second.
Right, but a market isn't defined by its architecture, is it?
I wouldn't think so.
Not at all. A market is simply any environment where buyers and sellers interact. It could be an international commodities exchange, or it could just be you buying a digital Fortnite skin from your cousin via PayPal.
So the location is irrelevant.
The interaction is everything.
And the singular rule that dictates every single interaction in any market is incentives. Human beings respond to incentives.
Always.
Let's look at a slice of pizza. If the local pizzeria decides to charge $100 for a single slice of pepperoni, I am highly incentivized to walk out the door and eat leftovers at home.
Obviously.
But if that exact same slice is priced at $1, my incentive flips entirely. I might buy 7 slices.
You are describing the law of demand. Demand is not just what people want. It is the quantity of a specific good that consumers are willing and able to purchase at various prices.
So as the price drops, The incentive to buy goes up.
Exactly. But the market isn't a monologue, it's a negotiation. We have to examine the other side of the counter, which is supply.
Right, because the person baking the pizza has to survive in a world of scarcity too.
They certainly do.
If the market dictates that a slice of pizza only sells for $1, the baker is incredibly disincentivized. Standing in front of a 900-degree oven all day to make a tiny profit margin won't cover their rent.
They might stop baking entirely.
But if consumers are suddenly willing to pay $20 for a slice, the baker's incentive skyrockets. They want to fire up a second oven and bake as many as humanly possible.
So we have two opposing gravitational forces. Buyers relentlessly want the lowest price possible to conserve their scarce resources. Sellers relentlessly want the highest price possible to maximize their returns.
And they meet in the middle.
Right. Through this constant, silent, aggregate tug-of-war, the market arrives at a specific equilibrium point.
The equilibrium price.
Yes. It is the precise intersection where the quantity that buyers demand perfectly matches the quantity that sellers supply. It clears the market.
Like magic.
Basically. If there's a massive oversupply of pizza, the price has to drop to incentivize buyers to clear it out. If there is a sudden spike in demand, say a local festival brings thousands of hungry people to the block, the price will rise as buyers compete for the limited slices.
This is what Adam Smith called the invisible hand. And what always strikes me about the invisible hand is how unsympathetic it is.
It is completely emotionless.
The market is an incredible supercomputer for coordinating millions of strangers through price signals. But it possesses zero empathy. It doesn't care about fairness. It doesn't care if you've had a terrible day or if you're struggling to make ends meet. It operates purely on the math of desire and physical limitation.
It is an entirely impersonal rationing mechanism. Think about an umbrella salesman on a city street. Suddenly, a massive rainstorm hits. Okay.
The price of an umbrella instantly doubles. That isn't necessarily because the salesman is maliciously evil. It's because the immediate demand spiked while the supply of physical umbrellas remains strictly limited.
So the price goes up to act as a filter.
Precisely. The higher price acts as a cold, mathematical filter, rationing the scarce umbrellas only to the people whose intense desire to stay dry outweighs their desire to keep their money.
Okay, I have to push back here. What if a society looks at that umbrella scenario, or a more serious scenario like affordable housing, and decides, this isn't morally right. People shouldn't be subjected to price gouging just because it's raining or because they need a place to live.
That's a very common reaction.
Right. What happens when a government steps in and declares a price control? Say they mandate that rent in a city can absolutely never exceed $1,000 a month.
The impulse to mandate fairness is a very natural human response to the coldness of the market. But ignoring the fundamental laws of supply and demand inevitably triggers severe secondary consequences.
Because you're messing with the incentives. Exactly. If a government caps rent artificially far below the natural equilibrium price, the immediate effect seems positive. Renters pay less. But watch the incentives shift. The incentive for developers to build new apartment complexes vanishes because the return on investment is destroyed.
Right. Why build if you can't make money?
And the incentive for current landlords to fix leaky roofs or upgrade appliances drops to zero.
Because they can't charge enough to justify the maintenance cost.
Exactly. The supply of quality housing plummets, but the artificially low price causes demand to surge. Everyone wants a $1,000 apartment.
So you get a shortage.
A massive shortage. People wait years on lists. Black markets emerge where people illegally sublet or demand under-the-table bribes just to hand over keys. The core lesson here is that you haven't eliminated the fundamental scarcity of housing. You've merely forced it to express itself through shortages and decaying infrastructure rather than through a high price tag.
So market forces are essentially like gravity.
Mm-hmm.
We can build an airplane to temporarily defy gravity, but we can't just pass a law declaring that gravity no longer exists.
That is an excellent way to frame it. You must work with mechanics, not pretend they aren't there.
Right.
But let's look at how we actually execute these market negotiations, because trading $1 for a pizza makes sense. But what if we revert to direct barter? What if I only have a goat and I need a month of high-speed Wi-Fi?
That is an absolute logistical nightmare. I have to find an internet service provider who not only has Wi-Fi to spare, but who also specifically wants a live goat.
It's highly unlikely.
Economists called this the double coincidence of wants, right? It's the friction of barter. How do you even make change for a goat? Do I give them a leg for a week of dial-up?
It's impossible to scale.
Yeah.
Which is why humanity invented a tool to grease the wheels of trade: We invented money.
Money. It is essentially economic lube. It dramatically reduces the friction of the double coincidence of wants.
It solves the goat problem completely. Money functions through three core purposes.
Okay, let's hear them.
First, it is a medium of exchange. It's a universally accepted intermediary. You sell your goat to a farmer for money, and you hand that money to the internet provider. Everyone gets what they want without needing perfectly aligned desires.
Okay, what's second?
Second, it's a unit of account. This is crucial for our brains. It allows us to compare the relative value of radically different items.
Like, I can look at a used sedan, a 5-hour consultation with a lawyer, and an espresso machine, and measure all of them against the exact same metric.
Exactly. And third, it operates as a store of value. A goat gets older, gets sick, or eats your garden. Its value degrades. But money allows you to hold on to the stored value of your past labor and seamlessly transport it into the future to buy something later.
But the reality is, we don't just keep our money under our mattresses. When we aren't actively spending it, we put it into banks. And this is where the mechanics of our economy get incredibly wild.
Oh, they really do.
The common perception is that a bank is just a highly secure warehouse. You deposit your paycheck, they lock it in a vault, and it sits there waiting for you.
That's what most people think.
But banks are actively deploying that money. They lend it out to businesses to build factories or to people to buy homes, and they charge a fee for allowing someone to jump the line and consume resources now instead of later. That fee is interest.
Interest is simply the cost of borrowing money. But let's take a massive step further because we need to demystify fractional reserve banking.
Yes, please.
It is arguably the most misunderstood operational mechanism in modern society, and it completely shatters how most people assume the world works.
I really want to spend time on this because it blew my mind when I read the source material. Let's run a scenario. I walk into a commercial bank and ask for a $3,000 personal loan to impulse buy a kayak.
Okay, a kayak.
I sign the paperwork. In my head, the bank manager walks into the back, looks at an account belonging to someone named Sarah who deposited her savings last week, takes $3,000 as Sarah's physical money, and hands it to me. But you're telling me that is entirely incorrect.
It is entirely incorrect. They are not acting as a physical intermediary moving paper bills from Sarah's pile to your pile.
Then what are they doing?
When a commercial bank approves your loan for that kayak, they quite literally create new money.
Wait, I need to make sure I'm hearing this right. When I sign a loan agreement on a Tuesday afternoon, I am manifesting new money into existence that did not exist on Monday.
You and the bank are acting in partnership to expand the money supply, yes. Let's look at the bank's digital ledger, their master spreadsheet.
Okay.
When you sign that loan, you are giving the bank a legally binding pledge of your future labor. You promise to pay them back with interest. To the bank, your signature is a valuable asset.
Right.
To balance their spreadsheet, they simply type the digits 3,000 into the column representing your checking account. Poof. That $3,000 was not diverted from another vault. It was conjured digitally to match the new asset you just provided them.
So I'm basically a financial wizard conjuring purchasing power. But how is that legal?
It is the foundation of the fractional reserve system. By law, commercial banks are only required to hold a very small fraction of their total deposits in actual physical reserve cash at the central bank.
A tiny fraction.
Yes. The vast majority of their deposits can be created dynamically as credit through loans. When you realize this, you realize that the vast, overwhelming majority of the money supply circulating in a modern economy is not physical cash printed by a government mint.
It's just numbers on a screen.
It is digital credit conjured by commercial banks every time someone takes out a mortgage, swipes a credit card, or finances a car.
That is deeply unsettling. If the money isn't entirely real in a physical sense, what happens when I pay the loan back?
It works in reverse. When you make your monthly payment and pay down the principal of that kayak loan, that money is effectively deleted from the broader money supply. The ledger balances out.
Wow.
Only the interest portion of your payment remains behind as the bank's operational profit.
But this exposes an incredibly fragile reality. If the bank has created millions of dollars in digital loans, but only holds a tiny fraction of physical cash in reserve, what happens if all the depositors get spooked and decide they want their physical cash at the exact same moment?
That is the ultimate vulnerability. It's called a bank run. Because the bank only has a tiny fraction of the actual liquidity, if everyone panics and demands their deposits simultaneously, the illusion of total liquidity shatters.
So what happens?
The bank simply does not have the money, and it collapses.
Which is why we had to invent psychological safety nets, like the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC, in the U.S.
Exactly.
It's essentially an economic Jedi mind trick. The government steps in and publicly declares, do not panic. Even if the bank fails, we guarantee your deposits. And because the people know their money is safe, they don't panic. And because they don't panic, they don't rush the bank, which means the bank run never happens.
It is a masterful management of human behavioral psychology. By artificially guaranteeing that the resources won't become scarce, you prevent the panic that would actually trigger the scarcity.
Okay, so we have money lubricating our trades, and we have banks actively expanding our ability to consume through credit. Now, let's zoom out and look at what happens when millions of people make these choices simultaneously.
Let's do it.
Let's track a single purchase. You walk into a cafe and order a $14 avocado toast. When that plate is set in front of you, you aren't just looking at bread and green mush. You are looking at the final output of a staggering, globally coordinated Rube Goldberg machine.
Oh, absolutely. To get that exact plate to your table, an unbelievable sequence of events had to occur perfectly.
Like what?
Well, you needed a farmer in a completely different climate to grow the avocados, which required specialized irrigation. You needed someone to harvest the wheat, mill it into flour, and bake the artisan bread. You needed an intricate network of cargo ships, refrigerated trucks, and burning fossil fuels to physically move those perishable ingredients across borders.
That's a lot of moving parts.
And we aren't done. You needed the cafe owner to secure real estate. And you needed a barista standing behind an expensive espresso machine to assemble it.
Economists categorize all these moving parts into the factors of production. These are the raw ingredients of any economy: land, labor, and capital.
Let's define them clearly. Land encompasses all natural resources: the dirt the avocado grew in, the oil refined for the truck's fuel, the water in the dough.
Okay, makes sense.
Labor is the human effort: the farmer sweating in the sun, the truck driver navigating traffic, the barista pulling the shot.
And capital is a term that trips people up because outside of economics, capital usually just means money. But in this context, it means something very physical.
Exactly. Economic capital refers to the man-made tools and machinery used to produce other goods.
Give me some examples.
The tractor used to harvest the wheat is capital. The refrigerated container on the cargo ship is capital. The barista's espresso machine is capital.
So you throw land, labor, and capital into the blender, and your output is the avocado toast. But how much toast a society can produce depends entirely on productivity.
Right.
The ability to generate more output per person per hour is literally the magic formula that transitions a nation from poverty to wealth.
But how do we actually measure that total wealth? How do we quantify the output of millions of cafes, factories, and software companies?
I feel an acronym coming on.
We use a metric called gross domestic product, or GDP. It is the total market value of all final goods and services produced strictly within a country's borders during a specific time period.
Final goods is the key word there. When measuring GDP, you count the $14 I paid for the finished toast. You absolutely do not count the $2 the cafe owner paid the baker for the raw loaf of bread.
Why not?
Because if you did, you'd be double counting the bread's value. But calculating a multi-trillion-dollar economy seems impossible. There is a classic formula in the source text: C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Break that down for us in a way that makes sense on a neighborhood level.
Let's map it out. C stands for consumption. It is the largest piece of the pie. It's you buying that avocado toast, paying for your Netflix subscription, or getting a haircut.
So everyday spending.
Yes. That stands for investment, but again, not stocks or bonds. This is a business buying a new fleet of delivery vans or building a new manufacturing plant. It's capital investment.
Okay.
G is government spending. When the city hires a crew to pave the road in front of the cafe, or the federal government buys a fighter jet, that activity adds to GDP.
And then we account for global trade. X is exports. If a local roaster sells a ton of coffee beans to a distributor in Paris, that counts toward our GDP because we produced it here.
Exactly.
But we have to subtract M, which is imports. If that cafe bought their fancy espresso machine from Italy, we subtract that value because the production didn't happen within our borders, we just consumed it.
So you sum all that up and you get a massive number. But here is the critical warning. GDP is a deeply inherently flawed metric. Measuring economic activity is not the same as measuring human progress or well-being. It is like trying to measure the quality of a novel by only counting the number of words.
I look at it through the lens of the broken window fallacy.
Oh, that's a perfect illustration.
Imagine a vandal throws a brick through the front window of the cafe. the owner have to hire a glazier for $500 to fix the window. Because a service was rendered, the GDP of the country just went up by $500.
So the macroeconomic dashboard looks great.
Right. But the reality is that society isn't any wealthier. The cafe owner is $500 core money they could have spent on a new coffee grinder or a bonus for the barista. GDP celebrates the replacement of destroyed wealth as if it were newly created wealth.
It's a profound blind spot. GDP also completely ignores the value of unpaid labor.
That's a huge one.
It is. If you hire a professional nanny to watch your toddler, GDP increases. If you sacrifice your career to stay home and raise that exact same child yourself, providing immense foundational value to society, GDP registers a flat zero. It ignores the black market. And most grimly, GDP doesn't care about morality. An economy can achieve massive GDP growth by clear-cutting ancient forests, polluting rivers, or manufacturing landmines. It is just a raw mathematical tally of activity.
And that activity is rarely a smooth ride. Economies experience wild business cycles. We have booms where production is high and jobs are plentiful, and we have recessions where the whole system contracts.
These cycles are the result of fluctuations in aggregate demand, the total desire of everyone in the economy to buy things, and aggregate supply, the total capacity of the economy to produce things.
So it's supply and demand on a massive scale.
Exactly. Usually, if demand collapses, a recession triggers, people lose jobs, and prices naturally drop because no one is buying.
But there is a scenario where the rules seem to break, and it's called stagflation. This is the absolute worst-case scenario for a consumer, isn't it?
Stagflation is a nightmare. It occurs when a severe shock to aggregate supply, say, a sudden global oil embargo that makes moving any product astronomically expensive, causes the economy to stall.
So people lose their jobs.
Unemployment spikes, meaning people have no income. But simultaneously, because the supply shock made everything so expensive to produce, prices skyrocket.
Oh, that's terrible.
You are faced with a depressed job market and wildly inflating grocery bills. It is economic misery compounded.
And surviving that misery relies almost entirely on your ability to sell your labor. Let's pivot slightly and look at the actual human element of production. When we strip away corporate branding and human resources jargon, what is a job, fundamentally?
Fundamentally, a job is a market transaction where the product being bought and sold is human time. You, the worker, are the supplier of time and effort. The corporation is the consumer demanding it.
But human labor behaves very differently than a barrel of oil or a stack of lumber. The models show something called a backward-bending supply curve.
Yes, that's a fascinating concept.
Normally, if the market price of something goes up, the supplier wants to sell more of it to maximize profit. But human psychology intervenes.
It perfectly illustrates the opportunity cost of time. If a worker's wage continually increases, they initially want to work more hours. But eventually, they hit a threshold where their baseline needs are comfortably met.
Right.
At that point, the opportunity cost of working an extra hour, which means sacrificing an hour of playing with their kids, pursuing a hobby, or simply resting, becomes far too high.
The free time becomes more valuable.
Exactly. Even if the hourly rate goes up, the worker will actually choose to supply less labor. They use their newfound wealth to buy back their own free time.
That assumes they have negotiating power, though. Why does a firm hire a human in the first place? They aren't running a charity to provide livelihoods.
They hire based on a calculation called marginal revenue product. A firm will only hire you if the measurable value your labor adds to the company is mathematically greater than the wage they pay you.
Makes sense from a business standpoint?
If your coding skills generate $100 of value per hour for a tech company, they might pay you $30 an hour. That $70 gap is the margin that covers their overhead and generates their profit.
This brings up a deeply common frustration. I hear people say, if the spreadsheet proves my output is objectively worth $100, why do I accept $30? Why am I giving away my value?
It returns to the reality of scarcity and the limits of individual capital. You accept the $30 because your alternatives are constrained.
How so?
You likely do not personally own the massive server farms, the $1 million marketing budget, or the established brand trust required to generate that $100 entirely on your own.
I definitely don't.
You are making a trade-off. You surrender a portion of the value you generate in exchange for access to the firm's capital infrastructure and the safety of a guaranteed, predictable wage.
But the power dynamic in that trade-off is intense, and we see it play out in the debate over the minimum wage. Establishing a minimum wage is essentially placing a government-mandated price floor on human time.
It is.
The argument is that if we raise it significantly, we instantly lift millions out of poverty. But if we look at the mechanics, what happens if a government suddenly mandates that the minimum wage jumps from $10 an hour to $30 an hour overnight?
You disrupt the marginal revenue product equation violently. If a fast food worker's labor only generates $20 of value per hour for the restaurant, and the government forces the owner to pay them $30, the restaurant fundamentally loses money for every single hour that person is on the clock.
So they can't afford to employ them.
The owner's incentive structure shifts radically. Instead of employing human labor, the owner is massively incentivized to invest in capital. They fire the workers and replace them with automated touchscreen ordering kiosks and robotic fryers.
So a policy intended to help workers can inadvertently accelerate their replacement by machines.
That's the risk, yes.
And while those workers struggle, we have to look at the other end of the spectrum because the inequality gap is staggering. The data is clear. In the 1960s, a CEO made roughly 20 times what their average worker made. Today, that multiplier is somewhere around 350 times.
It's a massive shift.
Are modern CEOs genuinely working 350 times harder than a CEO from 1965?
Objectively, no. A human day still only has 24 hours. This massive divergence is the result of structural shifts in how markets value risk and leverage. CEO compensation shifted heavily away from flat salaries and towards stock options, tying their wealth directly to the finance casino.
While the workers got left behind.
Concurrently, the bargaining power of the average worker weakened significantly as unions decline and industries consolidated into massive monopolistic corporations.
It essentially proves that labor markets are chaotic. They don't fit neatly into an academic supply and demand graph. You can pump a barrel of oil out of the ground and store it in a silo for 6 months waiting for the price to peak. But you cannot store a human life waiting for wages to improve. People have a physiological requirement to consume calories today.
Which leaves the individual worker in a position of perpetual vulnerability. They must navigate their personal scarcity constantly.
Right.
But let's look at the macro level. How do governments, these massive entities tasked with managing the collective scarcity of millions of citizens, fund their operations? Because generally speaking, governments don't produce consumer goods to sell for profit.
No, they don't sell avocado toast. To fund the schools, pave the roads, and buy the incredibly expensive military hardware, governments have to extract resources from the economy. They do this through taxes. Which brings us to taxes, debt, and inflation. Let's look at how governments steal from tomorrow to pay for today.
Taxes are mandatory extractions, and they are woven into almost every conceivable economic action. Income tax takes a direct slice of the labor you sell. Corporate tax takes a slice of a firm's profit. Sales tax or value-added tax takes a slice at the moment of consumption. Property tax takes a recurring slice based on the land you own.
And then my personal favorite, excise taxes, commonly known as sin taxes. This is the government stepping in with dual motives. They place massive taxes on alcohol, tobacco, or sugary drinks.
To disincentivize people.
Right. They say, we are artificially raising the price to disincentivize you from engaging in unhealthy behavior. But concurrently, they collect massive streams of revenue from the people who refuse to quit.
The larger societal debate isn't usually about whether to tax, but how the burden of those taxes should be distributed. A progressive tax system operates on the premise that the wealthy should carry a heavier burden. As your income scales up, the percentage you owe scales up as well.
Which seems fair to a lot of people.
Conversely, a flat tax proposes that every single citizen, whether a struggling barista or a tech billionaire, pays the exact same flat percentage of their income.
The pushback against a flat tax brings us right back to opportunity cost. If a government demands a flat 15% tax, losing 15% of a $30,000 annual salary might mean a family literally cannot afford their rent or basic nutrition.
The opportunity cost is survival.
Exactly. But losing 15% of a $30 million income just means the billionaire has to buy a slightly smaller private jet. The math is equal, but the human friction is vastly disproportionate.
Exactly. But regardless of how the tax is collected, governments are notorious for a specific habit. They almost invariably want to spend more money than they actually collect in tax revenue. When government spending exceeds tax receipts, you create a budget deficit.
And you can't just leave a deficit hanging. You have to fill the hole. How does the government get the cash?
They borrow it. The government issues bonds. A government bond is quite literally an IOU. When an investor or another country buys a U.S. Treasury bond, They are handing the government cash today in exchange for a legally binding promise that the government will pay them back the original amount plus a guaranteed interest rate on a specific future date.
And when you stack up decades and decades of these yearly budget deficits, you accumulate the national debt. The scale of this debt is hard to wrap your head around. The U.S. national debt is over $34 trillion. Japan carries a debt load that is over 260% of its entire economic output.
While countries like Norway sit practically debt-free, largely because they stumbled into massive offshore oil reserves and managed the profits through a sovereign wealth fund.
But looking at the U.S. or Japan is a massive national debt, inherently a catastrophic thing. We are conditioned to think of debt as a personal failure.
It is deeply nuanced. National debt is not inherently evil. It can be a highly strategic tool if it is deployed for productive capital investment.
Give me an example.
Imagine a government borrows $1 trillion at a very low interest rate to build a revolutionary high-speed rail network and modernize the energy grid. That infrastructure vastly increases the speed of commerce, boosts corporate productivity, and generates massive new tax revenues over the next 50 years.
So it pays off.
In that scenario, the debt literally pays for itself. The return on investment exceeds the cost of borrowing.
So debt is fine if it builds the machine. But there is a massive trap here.
The trap is using borrowed money to fund short-term consumption or political vanity projects. If a government borrows billions to fund immediate cash handouts or unsustainable entitlement programs just to win an upcoming election, what economists disparagingly call vote nonsense, they're not increasing the productive capacity of the economy.
They're just spending future money.
They're just throwing a party and handing the bill to the next generation.
And if that reckless borrowing continues, the math eventually turns predatory. If the total debt becomes so unimaginably large that the government has to borrow new money just to cover the interest payments on the old money they borrowed decades ago, you enter a death spiral.
When global investors witness that death spiral, they lose faith in the government's ability to manage its economy. They will demand astronomically high interest rates to justify the risk of lending, or they will simply stop buying the bonds entirely.
And then what?
At that point, the government hits a wall. They can default, throwing their hands up and refusing to pay, as Greece nearly did in 2012, or as Argentina has done repeatedly. A default craters the nation's banking system and plunges citizens into severe austerity.
But there's a second, much darker lever the government can pull to escape its debt. They can summon the monster of inflation. And this brings us to the shadowy realm of central banks, the Federal Reserve in the U.S., the European Central Bank. They don't just set interest rates, they control the actual supply of money. Tell me about quantitative easing.
Quantitative easing, or QE, is a highly complex monetary tool that essentially allows a central bank to inject massive liquidity into an economy. In simplified terms, central bank digitally conjures new money out of thin air and uses that new money to purchase financial assets like long-term government bonds or mortgage-backed securities from commercial banks.
So the central bank takes the illiquid bonds onto their own balance sheet and in return blasts the commercial banks with billions in fresh liquid cash, hoping those banks will turn around and lend it out to stimulate businesses.
Correct. It is effectively a high-tech, spreadsheet-driven method of printing money to flood the system with capital.
Which begs an incredibly obvious question. If the central bank can just hit a few keystrokes and create $1 trillion to buy assets, why do we pay taxes? Why are we arguing over school budgets or highway funding? If the government needs money, why doesn't central bank just put $1 trillion every month and distribute it to everyone?
Because of the inescapable iron law of supply and demand. Think about the physical reality of the economy. If the central bank magically deposits 1 million newly printed dollars into the checking account of every single citizen tonight, everyone wakes up feeling incredibly rich.
I would immediately go buy a new car, a new house, and a massive TV.
Exactly. Aggregate demand explodes globally. But, and this is the absolute crux of the issue, did printing those numbers on a screen create any new steel? Did it grow any new avocados? Did it build any new houses?
No. The physical amount of stuff in the real world remained exactly the same.
Therefore, you suddenly have an avalanche of new, aggressive dollars chasing the exact same limited supply of physical goods. The dealerships have 10 cars, but suddenly 1,000 millionaires are fighting to buy them.
Right.
The dealers aren't stupid. They realize the purchasing power of the dollar has diluted, so they instantly raise the price of the car to $1 million to match the new demand. The numbers on the price tag skyrocket, but your actual purchasing power remains perfectly static.
And nothing actually changes.
You aren't any wealthier, you just need a wheelbarrow of cash to buy a loaf of bread. That is the mechanical reality of inflation.
And when a government refuses to stop, when they keep the money printers running hot just to pay off their debts or fund a war, you get hyperinflation. It is the most terrifying economic phenomenon imaginable. Look at Zimbabwe in 2008.
A horrific example.
The government printed money so recklessly that their annual inflation rate hit 89.7 sextillion percent. That is number 897, followed by 20 zeros. The government was issuing $100 trillion banknotes, and citizens still couldn't afford to buy lunch.
It is the ultimate breakdown of the social contract. The physical scarcity of the real world remained, but the tool we invented to negotiate that scarcity, the currency, failed entirely. It lost its ability to function as a store of value and reverted to worthless paper.
Okay, we've explored how individual nations wrestle with their internal scarcity and their own currency. But what happens when these distinct national systems collide on the global stage? Or more tragically, what happens when a nation is fundamentally trapped by geography from the very start? Let's move into global scarcity and development economics.
When an American company wants to purchase a massive shipment of electronics from a factory in Japan, a unique friction arises. The Japanese factory owner cannot pay their local workers or their local property taxes using US dollars. They require Japanese yen.
So they have to swap it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Before the trade can happen, those dollars must be swapped for yen in the foreign exchange market, or forex.
The forex market is essentially a giant global scale where currencies are weighed against each other every second of every day. And for most major economies, the value of their currency floats. It isn't fixed. It fluctuates wildly based on international supply and demand. If the U.S. economy is surging, creating massive technological innovations and paying high interest rates, global investors want a piece of that action. But to invest in the U.S., they have to buy U.S. dollars. That massive global demand drives up the value of the dollar relative to other currencies.
That is the natural float. But some nations choose a different path. They peg their currency, artificially locking its exchange rate to a stable currency like the US dollar.
Why would they do that?
This provides absolute predictability for their exporters, but it requires the country's central bank to aggressively intervene in the markets, constantly buying or selling massive reserves to maintain the illusion of that fixed price.
And government absolutely manipulate this to their advantage. Currency manipulation is a fierce geopolitical weapon. Let's say a country intentionally implements policies to heavily devalue and weaken its own currency. To an outsider, weakening your own money sounds foolish. But what is the hidden incentive?
The incentive is export dominance. If you intentionally crash the value of your currency, suddenly every product manufactured in your country becomes incredibly cheap for foreign buyers using stronger currencies. Your factories get flooded with global orders.
So you're basically stealing business.
You essentially steal manufacturing jobs from other nations by making your goods irresistibly cheap on the global market. It boosts your internal employment, but it furiously angers your international trading partners.
It's a high-stakes chess match. But zooming out from currency wars, we have to confront the most painful, enduring question in all of economics. Why are some countries incredibly, sustainably wealthy, engineering quantum computers and exploring space, while other nations seem permanently anchored in extreme poverty?
For decades, the textbook, overly simplistic answer from developed nations was, they just need capital, send them foreign aid, build a few factories, and they will naturally industrialize. But reality repeatedly proved that entirely wrong.
Reality forces us to acknowledge the geographic lottery. The deck is often stacked against a nation before it even forms a government.
Historical context is paramount. Many deeply impoverished nations were former colonies. For centuries, their raw resources and their human capital were violently extracted to build the wealth of the colonizing empires.
That leaves a massive scar.
When independence was finally achieved, these nations were left with fractured administrative systems, deep societal trauma, and economies entirely dependent on exporting raw materials rather than building internal innovation.
And then there is the brutal reality of pure physical geography. If your country is landlocked, meaning you have absolutely no sovereign access to a coastline or deep water ports, the logistical cost of trucking your goods across foreign borders just to reach a cargo ship puts you at an immediate, permanent mathematical disadvantage in global trade.
It's a huge burden.
Or consider nations situated in tropical zones plagued by endemic malaria. The constant cycle of disease aggressively destroys the health, energy, and overall productivity of the labor force.
It is a profound headwind. But then we encounter the most devastating paradox in development economics: The resource curse.
The resource curse.
Intuition tells us that if an impoverished nation suddenly discovers massive subterranean reserves of oil, diamonds, or rare earth metals, their economic struggles are over.
Right. You struck oil. Congratulations, your country is rich.
But historically, it operates as a devastating curse. Here's the mechanism. When foreign oil conglomerates flood the country with billions of dollars to buy that specific resource, it artificially inflates the value of the nation's currency.
Okay, so the currency gets strong.
Suddenly, because their currency is so strong, every other industry in the country, their agriculture, their textile manufacturing, becomes vastly too expensive to compete on the global market. Those localized industries wither and die. The entire economy hollows out until it becomes entirely dependent on a single commodity.
They become a one-trick pony. And if the global price of oil plummets, the entire national economy immediately goes into free fall because they have absolutely nothing else to fall back on.
Furthermore, massive resource wealth concentrated in a single industry often incentivizes extreme political corruption. Whoever controls the government controls the oil revenue, leading to violent coups and brutal dictatorships rather than democratic investments in education.
Which points to the actual undeniable bedrock of national wealth. It isn't just natural resources, and it isn't just foreign aid. It is the presence of strong, inclusive institutions.
Institutions are the invisible infrastructure of prosperity. They mean transparent property rights, a functional, uncorrupted judicial system, and political stability.
Give me an example of how that plays out.
Think about a farmer. If the legal institutions are so broken that the farmer cannot obtain a legally binding deed to prove he owns his land, he cannot use that land as collateral to secure a loan from a bank to buy a tractor. He is trapped in subsistence farming. If a foreign tech company fears that a dictator might arbitrarily seize their new factory next week, they simply will not invest.
Without strong institutions, pouring billions of dollars of foreign aid into a country often achieves nothing. The capital just evaporates into the pockets of corrupt officials, funding government fleets of luxury cars while the roads remain unpaved. Yeah. You cannot simply mandate or purchase prosperity.
You really can't.
And speaking of the fragility of global trade, my mind keeps going back to the physical supply chains. The 2021 Suez Canal crisis is the ultimate metaphor for everything we've discussed regarding global scarcity.
The grounding of the Ever Given container ship.
Exactly. One single, very large boat gets wedged sideways in a sandbank in a single canal in Egypt. And because global trade has squeezed every ounce of slack out of the system in the pursuit of absolute efficiency, because factories rely on just-in-time delivery and hold almost zero spare inventory, that one stuck boat caused a catastrophic chain reaction.
It was unbelievable.
It trapped over 400 other cargo ships. It froze 12% of all global trade instantly. The estimated cost of the world economy was nearly $10 billion a day.
It perfectly exposes the vulnerability of our optimization. We have constructed this breathtakingly intricate, hyper-efficient global machine to shuffle our scarce resources around the planet, but we engineered it with virtually zero margin for error.
Which brings us to a fascinating realization. We have spent this entire deep dive discussing highly rational, mathematically pristine economic models. We've talked about comparative advantage, equilibrium prices, and marginal revenue product. But there is a massive, glaring flaw sitting right in the center of all these beautiful equations.
The operators of the system.
The humans. The traditional economic models assume that you and I are perfectly rational, cold, calculating machines who always, without fail, process perfect information to maximize our personal utility.
Which is, frankly, hilarious.
It's completely absurd. Real human beings are emotional chaos merchants. We do not navigate life using a mental spreadsheet. We navigate life using ancient evolutionary brain wiring, deep-seated biases, and rampant anxiety.
This is the domain of behavioral economics, and it completely rewrites how we understand markets. It acknowledges that human psychology constantly overrides rational math. Let's look at the specific glitches in our programming. The most prominent is hyperbolic discounting.
The inability to value the future. If I offer you $5 right now, this exact second, or I promise you $50 1 year from today, your logical prefrontal cortex can do the math. It knows 1,000% return is incredible.
What?
But your ancient lizard brain, evolved for immediate survival, screams, take the calories now, the future is uncertain. We aggressively discount the value of delayed gratification. It is the exact neurological reason why millions of people fail to save adequately for retirement, and why we choose the immediate dopamine hit of eating a donut over the delayed health benefits of going for a run.
We are fighting our own biology. Then there is loss aversion. Traditional math suggests that gaining $20 and losing $20 carry the same emotional weight, just in opposite directions. But behavioral testing proves that the psychological agony of losing $20 registers nearly twice as intensely in our brains as the fleeting joy of finding $20. We are fundamentally terrified of loss.
Which makes us incredibly irrational investors. We hold on to a plummeting stock way too long because we refuse to admit the pain of the loss, but we sell a winning stock far too early just to secure a tiny, safe gain.
And that leads directly to the sunk cost fallacy.
Oh, this is my personal curse. The sunk cost fallacy is when you find yourself sitting in a movie theater an hour into a truly excruciating, terrible 3-hour superhero sequel. You are miserable. But you tell yourself, well, I already paid $20 for the ticket, and I watched the first 8 movies in this franchise. I have to stay and finish it.
It is entirely irrational. The $20 is gone. The time spent on the previous movies is gone. They are sunk costs. You cannot recover them. They should have absolute zero bearing on the decision of how to spend the next 2 hours of your strictly limited, scarce life. The rational move is to walk out and do something enjoyable. But human psychology cannot let go of the perceived investment. We systematically throw good time and good money after bad.
And because our brains are riddled with these exploitable glitches, we are easily manipulated by the systems around us. This is the concept of nudges. Corporations and governments know we are lazy and prone to inertia, so they design the architecture of our choices to manipulate us.
They absolutely do.
It's why the default option on your phone is always to share your data. It's why the next episode of a show autoplays in 5 seconds. It's why human resources automatically enrolls you in a retirement 401k plan. They know that if it required filling out 3 forms to opt in, we would never do it, and we would spend our retirement money on takeout food instead.
Nudges weaponize our irrationality, sometimes for our benefit, often for corporate profit. And nowhere is human irrationality amplified more dramatically than in the financial markets. The finance casino.
Let's strip away the mystique of Wall Street. Fundamentally, what is the actual purpose of the finance industry?
At its core, the entire financial sector exists merely as an allocation mechanism. It is a bridge designed to connect entities who currently have an excess of capital savers, pension funds, with entities who desperately need capital to build things, startups, governments, corporations.
The most famous tool for this is the stock market. A stock is not just a fluctuating ticker symbol. It is a literal, legal slice of ownership in a corporation. And there is a dominant theory in finance called the efficient market hypothesis. It argues that because thousands of supercomputers and millions of analysts are constantly scrutinizing every company, the current price of a stock already perfectly reflects all publicly available information on Earth.
The implication of that hypothesis is that it is mathematically impossible for an average person to consistently beat the market by picking undervalued stocks, because the market has already digested the information faster than you can read the headline.
But if the market is perfectly efficient, why do massive, violent stock crashes happen?
Because the market efficiently processes information, but human beings interpret that information through the chaotic lens of fear, greed, and loss aversion. The math is efficient. The panic is highly irrational.
And beyond stocks, you have bonds, which we discussed just loans, generally considered the safe, boring bedrock of a portfolio. But then the finance industry engineered derivatives.
Derivatives are incredibly complex financial contracts whose value is derived from an underlying asset, like the price of wheat or a bundle of mortgages. They were originally invented for a very practical reason, to help farmers hedge their risk against catastrophic weather.
But Wall Street mutated them. They turned options, futures, and swaps into highly leveraged tools for pure speculative gambling on tiny price movements. They are incredibly useful for sophisticated risk management, right up until a few massive banks over-leverage them, miscalculate the risk, and violently detonate the global economy, exactly as we witnessed in 2008.
And emerging from the ashes of that 2008 distrust of traditional finance, we get the wild card: cryptocurrency.
Crypto. The most polarizing topic in modern economics. Depending entirely on which echo chamber you listen to, blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies are either the glorious, decentralized future of all human exchange that will finally liberate us from the tyranny of central bank inflation, or they are a massive, environmentally destructive Ponzi scheme operating with complex cryptographic steps.
The objective reality is that the underlying blockchain technology offers genuine innovations in decentralized ledgers. But currently, the overwhelming majority of crypto assets function purely as highly volatile casino chips driven by speculative mania, not as a stable medium of exchange for buying groceries. Regardless of whether you are investing in boring bonds or volatile crypto, the iron law of finance remains the risk-return trade-off.
If an investment is incredibly safe, it will pay you almost nothing. If an investment promises to make you incredibly rich overnight, there is a massively high probability it will go to zero. You cannot escape risk, you can only manage it, which is why the golden rule of surviving the casino is relentless diversification.
But as we pull all of these massive concepts together, we must look at the ultimate macro structures that govern how humanity lives. Every society in every era has to answer three brutal questions regarding their scarce resources. What are we going to make? How are we going to organize the labor to make it? And once it's made, who gets to consume it?
The grand menu of economic systems. This is how we organize survival. Let's look at the ideological extremes. On one side, we have pure capitalism. This system relies entirely on private ownership of capital, highly decentralized free markets, and the relentless individual pursuit of profit.
And its track record is undeniable. Capitalism is an unparalleled engine for incentivizing high-speed technological innovation and generating immense, staggering amounts of total societal wealth. But its systemic trade-off is brutal. If left entirely unchecked by regulation, capitalism's natural tendency is to consolidate wealth into monopolies, creating crushing inequality and actively exploiting labor and natural resources to maximize shareholder returns.
On the other extreme, we look at communism, or a command economy. This is the ultimate centralization. The state abolishes private property, taking total ownership of all factories, farms, and resources. A central bureaucracy attempts to mathematically plan the entire economy, deciding exactly how many shoes to manufacture, how much wheat to grow, and distributing it based on perceived need.
Theoretically, it aims for absolute equality. But practically, it requires a level of perfect, real-time information that no human bureaucracy can possibly process. Without the organic price signals of a free market to indicate what people actually want, command economies usually devolve into terrible inefficiencies. They overproduce useless goods, underproduce necessities, resulting in endless breadlines. The lack of personal profit incentives stifles innovation, and historically, the absolute concentration of power required to enforce the plan has led to catastrophic human tragedies, such as the devastating politically driven grain famines in the USSR.
So, pure unbridled capitalism grinds the vulnerable into dust, and pure command communism suffocates under its own bureaucratic weight. Where does that leave us? What system actually functions in reality?
The reality is that ideological purity does not survive contact with human nature. Every single functional economy on Earth today is a mixed economy. It is a pragmatic synthesis.
It's a blend. We think of the United States as the ultimate bastion of free market capitalism. Yet the U.S. economy is heavily intertwined with massive socialist-style interventions. The government heavily subsidizes agriculture, so food remains cheap. It provides public education for all children. It manages vast social safety nets like Medicare and Social Security. And it uses federal agencies to regulate everything from the stock market to aviation safety. That is not a pure free market.
And look at China. Governed by an authoritarian communist party, it nonetheless recognized the wealth-generating power of markets. They operate under a system of state capitalism, heavily integrating into global trade networks, hosting massive stock exchanges, and producing powerful billionaires, all tightly monitored by the state.
Or Scandinavia, operating under democratic socialism, where they balance punishingly high progressive taxes and incredibly robust cradle-to-grave social safety nets with highly competitive privately owned free markets. It proves that no one has perfectly solved the scarcity problem. Every single economic system is simply a different menu of trade-offs.
Exactly. Economics is not the pursuit of a flawless utopia. It is the pragmatic, often painful process of choosing which specific set of problems your society would rather manage.
Let's wrap our arms around this incredibly vast journey we just took. We started with the unyielding physical reality of the universe, our infinite human desires violently colliding with the finite, scarce stuff of the earth. We explored how that permanent friction forces every single one of us to make choices, and how every choice carries the heavy, hidden price tag of an opportunity cost.
We trace the mechanics of human survival, breaking down how we utilize trade and the counterintuitive math of comparative advantage to be the least worst and survive together. We examined the cold, impersonal rationing mechanism of supply and demand, the lubricating, friction-reducing power of money, and the frankly staggering reality of commercial banks conjuring digital credit out of thin air.
We zoomed out to witness the global Rube Goldberg machine of supply chains, understanding how the components of land, labor, and capital merge into a $14 avocado toast, all measured by the deeply flawed blind yardstick of GDP. We scrutinized the labor markets where we sell our scarce time, and we watched how governments extract our wealth through taxes, steal from tomorrow by issuing debt, and occasionally destroy their own currencies through the terrifying mechanism of inflation.
We acknowledged the tragic inequalities dictated by the geographic lottery and the resource curse, emphasizing the critical invisible infrastructure of strong legal institutions. And finally, we turned the mirror back on ourselves, recognizing that the human beings operating these grand rational systems are actually emotional, bias-ridden chaos merchants, constantly manipulated by the nudges of behavioral psychology within a pragmatic blend of capitalist and socialist structures.
The true value of absorbing this deep dive isn't just to accumulate trivia or sound brilliant at a dinner party. Economics is the intense, continuous study of human behavior, desperation, and ingenuity in a world defined by strict physical limits. By fully internalizing the concepts of opportunity cost and the quiet power of incentives, you are handed a sharper, clearer lens. You can look at every career choice you make, every political headline demanding a new policy, and every seemingly arbitrary price tag in the grocery aisle, and understand the massive churning machinery operating just beneath the surface.
It shatters the illusion of permanence. The cereal on the shelf isn't just there, it is the culmination of a million-strong negotiation.
Which leaves me with one final, deeply personal thought for you to carry into the rest of your day. We spent a lot of time establishing that your time, the literal hours of your lifespan, is your ultimate, most fundamentally scarce resource. And we discuss how behavioral economics proves that massive corporations actively design the architecture of your technology with nudges designed specifically to bypass your rational brain.
They absolutely do.
So I want you to ask yourself this. If your time is truly scarce, and every single choice you make carries the heavy, unrecoverable weight of an opportunity cost, are the default options, the endless algorithmic scrolls, and the persistent notification nudges on your phone actually there to save your valuable time? Or are they quietly, efficiently spending your most precious, unrecoverable resource to maximize someone else's corporate profit?
That's a profound question to leave on.
The next time you instinctively reach into your pocket to unlock your screen, pause and ask yourself, what is the true opportunity cost of my next hour? Thank you for taking this massive, intense deep dive with us today. The hidden machinery of the world is incredibly complex, but understanding how the gears turn makes navigating it vastly more fascinating. We'll catch you on the next one.